So, and then I upload them to um, the on the canvas on Canva, and I will put it under the week that we had the live session. So it'll say live session. So if there's anything that you need to go back to, and you can click on there, and that's where the link will be, where it says recorded live session. So that'll be under week 1, 3, 5, and 7, just in case you have to review any information or go from there. I think we're just missing 2 people. Um, we're going to go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. I started with Concordia since the inception of the Concordia program for school counselors back in 2011. So I've taught all the courses here, been a supervisor for and done field work. This is my 28th year as a school counselor for the same district. I've done all 3 levels within that district. I started at middle, went up to high school, and then I'm now at elementary. We are an elementary school district where I work. So mostly we have elementary schools from K to 5. That's the majority of our schools. And then we have 3 middle schools that are 6 to 8. And then we have one dependent high school that was started back in 2010, I think, something like that. So that's a little bit about me and my experience. And so, what I'm going to ask of you guys is to just tell me if you currently are in education, and if you are, how long you've been there, and then why you chose the school counseling program. You guys can just jump in, whoever wants to go first. Just turn on your mics.
I can go first.
Thank you.
Hi, yes, my name is Jimmy. I am currently in education. I have been in education now for 4 years, ranging from community college to high school. I recently started substitute teaching as well, apart from working at a community college. The reason I got into counseling is because I've been working at the academic counseling department at my local community college for the last like 3.5 years. I was doing something completely different. I was supposed to do physical education teaching, but just being a coach for a while kind of involves, talking to the youth, like and helping them out in many different things. And working within counseling, I got motivated to take a different route. I'm more happy and comfortable with the route I'm taking now. Of
Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy.
course.
Who'd like to go next? For anyone who just came in, we're just introducing ourselves, and then we're discussing what if we're in education and why we have chosen school counseling as a master's program.
I can go next.
Thank you.
My name is Brianna. I live in Los Angeles. I've been working as a substitute teacher for the past 3 years now. I got my degree in design, so it's not doesn't really have anything to do with education, but after I graduated, I started working in after school program. And then that's when I was like, oh, I'd like to work in education. So I started subbing to like kind of get a feel for it. I started on track to get my credential in math, and then I realized that wasn't right for me. And I am now doing this program instead because I realized I did still really want to work with students, just not teaching like, one of the core
Subjects.
yeah, subjects. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's how I got here, and I'm really happy with it so far.
Great. Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I can go next.
Go
My
ahead.
name is Claudia. I do work at a high school in the library. I guess I got into counseling. I've done education. I've worked with like at a recreation program, then the high school. So I've been working. I guess ever since I left high school, I've always been in education. But I wanted to be a teacher, and I ended up not liking it, and I decided to choose counseling instead. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Thank you. All right, I'm just gonna start calling on people. Destiny.
Hi, my name's Destiny Brosio, and I'm currently an intervention teacher at a high school. So I work one-on-one with students who need help in academics. And I've been in the education system for like about 6 years now. And I got into the master's program for counseling because I really like working with students and talking to them and connecting with them. And then also I was inspired by my counselor in high school to become a high school counselor. So yeah, that's why I
Thank you,
chose
Destiny.
the
Thank you so much.
You're
Natalie.
So I've been in education for many years. I've worn many different hats from coordinating after school programs to tutoring to subbing to providing services for the foster youth in various school districts. And I kind of just I fell into the counseling role with this last position when I was providing services, mental health and academic services to the foster youth. And I just think that, you know, outside guidance and support is just as important as, what the kids are taking in the classrooms.
Thank you, Natalie. Hannah.
So, my name's Hannah. For those of you who don't know me, I don't work in a school right now. I actually work for the county as a social worker. I know a lot of people who are either teachers or school counselors, so they kind of encouraged me to go this route. Um, but I also feel like it has a lot to do with like my current position and what I see in the schools and how things are handled, and I may not necessarily be a fan, so I wanted to go this route to hopefully change the way some things are done.
Thank you, Hannah. Marissa.
Hi, my name's Marissa. I was currently in the master's program for school psychology, and then I switched over to school counseling. I work at an elementary school as a behavioral interventionist.
Thank you. Gloria.
Hi, my name is Gloria. I'm currently not working at a school. I'm just a stay-at-home mom for now, but I was working as a bilingual instructional aide alongside like working with English language learners.
Okay.
And I had never worked with that kind of group, and so I noticed I was really inspired by the counselors and just becoming familiarizing with everything that they do.
Mhm.
So that really inspired my journey to kind of follow and do counseling as well.
Thank you. Monisha.
Hi, my name is Monisha. I currently do not work at a school. I too am a social worker. The reason why I chose school counseling is because, for my own personal reasons, my son just had the worst luck with counselors. And also, being a social worker and working in social services, there's just people out there who work in the education system that need not to be working in there. And so I just think people need these kids need advocates and people who really care about their future. And it's kind of how I just ended up here.
Thank you. Daniela.
Hi, good evening. My name is Daniela, and I currently work as a development specialist. And so I service the foster youth. And well, my last position, I worked primarily with K through 6, and I was teaching them social emotional learning skills. And I
Mhm.
worked alongside with counselors. And now
Mhm.
my current position, I work with high school, and I teach them independent living skills. And I work more with counselors and social workers. And so that's what inspired me to be a school counselor.
Excellent. Thank you. Right now.
Hello, good evening. My name is Reina. I am currently not working. I was recently laid off in September, but in my previous job, I worked as a drug and resource counselor for a nonprofit agency. and I love working with middle school kids as well as with high school students, and that's the reason why I got back into school so that I can finish this master's program.
Thank you. Australia?
Hey everyone, my name is Estrella. I've been in the education field now for about 5 years. This is my fifth incoming 6th year, and I've just always wanted to be a counselor. That was just the background for everything. I've always liked the area.
Thank you. Tanya?
Can you guys hear me? Yes, hi. So I currently do not work at the school system right now. I work in law. And the reason I want to be a counselor is because I was a first generation graduate and my family was not educated. My parents were not, they didn't really show me much about college. I kind of had to navigate the system on my own, and it was very challenging. But it was rewarding. Obviously, I'm here right now, and I want to be able to be that guidance for kids who were in my shoes.
Thank you. And Blas, is that correct?
Yeah. Wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, my name's Blas Trujillo, and I think I've always known that I wanted to work in the mental health department because growing up, I feel like I really needed someone in that aspect, and now I want to be that person for the students. And I currently do work at a school. I've been working there for about 4 years. I started as a librarian, and right now I'm the community liaison.
Nice. Thank you. All right. So this course is going to go over legal and ethical issues that school counselors face and how to keep ourselves, safe and what not finding and making sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to do and following the ASCA standards and doing what most school counselors would do in a certain situation. So we're going to review some of the legal aspects, and you'll go over a lot of the documents that are found on the ASCA website and how to protect yourself. So as an ASCA member, you get insurance for liability for $1 million, which helps you with any type of legal case that you may have if you are actually brought into it. Now, most of us have unions within the districts that we work, if we're working in a public school district, so we have a union that represents us, and that is usually a person who takes care of us if you belong to the union. The union will provide you with lawyers and other things to help you if anything legal were to occur. So we'll be talking about how to keep ourselves out of those situations by documenting what is the parts that we need to focus on, and just overall the laws that we'll be talking about. So these will apply, as you can see, we'll see different scenarios from elementary to middle to high school. Obviously, each level has a different amount of responsibility. Okay. For like sexual assault in elementary is huge, right? And so there's a lot of new laws that have come out to help those students when they're assaulted by an adult or either another child. So those are some of the things that we'll talk about within this course because those laws are protecting it. And in the past, many times our insurance companies covered any legal situation that the district got into. At this point, with so many cases, some of the districts are required to teach curriculum, like I'm required to teach curriculum to elementary school students about safety and security for sexual abuse, right? And that is because our insurance company will only cover 50% of our lawsuits from here on out because of the lawsuits that we've had in the past. So these are things that we'll discuss and go over and what schools have to put in place in order to stay afloat as a district. So thinking we'll know what we're supposed to do, but also it's bigger than us as school counselors, but we need to know what we're supposed to do as school counselors, because some of our laws and some of the things that we follow are different than our school district. And sometimes you walk into a school district, like I've been there 28 years, and within my school district, it hasn't been always the exact same. Some of the people that have been my supervisors or district personnel don't know the confidentiality and the rules that we have. So you'll have people that are above you that are head of your department, like our PPS department, and they're not familiar with all of that information. So it's important for you to know and be able to show where that documentation is and how to support yourself as a school counselor, because you can run into a district that hasn't had those experiences, or someone comes in new and they're not familiar with that. And so then you're able to guide yourself and help yourself through those situations. I did have the welcome video that went over the assignments. Would you like me to review any of those before we get started? How many of you have had an opportunity to go over all of the assignments and see the welcome video? Okay, so your first assignment is due week 2. And you're going to watch the video from Dr. Carolyn Stone. She is the person that has been the liaison and the expertise for our Ask, and she's worked for Ask for many years. And she talks about the legal situations, and that's who wrote our book that we are using. So, and you make sure you get the 5th edition. It's important that you don't get the 4th edition, because the 4th edition, since our ethical standards were rewritten in 2022, the 5th edition applies those ethical standards. Okay, so you don't want to be using Dr. Stone's 4th edition, which will apply to the old ethical standards. Okay. So after you go watch her video, then you're going to read 3 other sources that are on the assignment page. And then you're going to write a narrative essay, APA format, on professionalism and ethics, okay? And so you're going to answer the questions that are on the assignment page, which are: what does professionalism mean to you? What ethical challenge do you think you'll face as a school counselor? And the impact of at least one of the ideas that Dr. Stone discussed in the video that would be significant to you as a future counselor. And then cyberspace, like how do you have a social media? What does it say about you? And the ethics behind having that social media page. And then you're going to comment on your personal views and values and the use of social media. So the importance of it. Like, I mean, it has some very strong, great use factors, and then it also has negative factors. Like the most of the time we spend as school counselors is investigating those social web pages for our students. So so we want to look at it from both aspects. This assignment should be about 3 to 4 pages, and you're going to make sure that you download the template for the APA format. So just make sure you're consistently using this. Just a reminder, I know you've written several papers thus far, as this isn't the first course in the program. Just make sure you're using the template each and every time so that you don't forget your subheadings, and your citations, and your reference page. Okay, any questions on your first assignment? The second assignment is your professional and personal views on the LGBTQ AI+, and that is due week 3. So there are 3 videos that you will watch, and you're going to take, after viewing all 3, you're going to write a well-developed narrative essay, APA format, with citations that support your thinking to address, and you're going to take 2 themes from either a about your personal and professional views. And you are going to answer the questions: what new learning or changes have occurred on these issues for you? And how do you reconcile personal, religious, and professional values as a future counselor? And include at least one idea from the videos to reflect upon in your narrative as an impact as a school counselor. And then you're going to comment on these issues if they're currently prevalent at the school that you're familiar with. If you're doing your practicum or field work, any connection that you may have about these issues, personal or professionally. And this also will be 3 pages, 3 to 4 pages long. Your third assignment is due week 5. You will present in our week 5 class. So you will do a presentation. It does require a PowerPoint or a Canva or whatever, format you're going to use to do your presentation. Okay. So you're going to have a 4 to 5 minute presentation. Probably jot that down to 3. I have to always calculate how many students are in the class to determine how long you will have to speak. And I'll put that in the announcements, okay? Because I want to make sure that we always end on time and that we don't go over, because someone always has to go last, and we want to make sure that everybody is heard equally, right? So during the week 5 session, you are going to present and you're going to describe 2 laws about the historically underserved groups of students, right? And those historically underserved groups are special needs population, our English language learners, our undocumented youth, our racial and ethnic minorities, our foster youth, our homeless youth, our socially and economically disadvantaged youth, and our LGBTQ AI plus group. Okay, so those are the groups. When I say racially and ethnic minorities, those are any groups. Okay, so you don't have to focus, you can focus on one specific one. If there's one that you're most concerned about, maybe for the school where you're connected to, maybe that's the population is being underserved at your particular school site, or something that hits you. So you'll pick one of those. Okay. So we'll have duplicates, and that's fine. We don't worry about that part. And then your PowerPoint, you'll be talking about it. And your PowerPoint, your slides that you implement should briefly describe current issues and challenges faced by those students in the underserved population, 2 mental health related and education related laws that are still in effect today, which impact those students that are historically underserved, and how those laws affect those students' mental health and educational functioning, and how you would apply those laws as a school counselor. Okay. So your slides, you can kind of put most of that, no more than 2 slides for each question for the most part. Maybe you can get it all on one side, but make sure that it's legible, it's not too small, so that when you're presenting, we're able to see what you're presenting, and you'll be having a discussion about that. And that's your assignment number 3. So if something prevents you from coming to class on week 5, that's something that you should write an email to me or have a discussion with me, and we'll work out the details of how you'll do your presentation. Your 4th assignment is your freedom of expression assignment. Now, this assignment, we want you to focus on the high school students, right? And so we want you to think about what students say or do, or they don't say or do, in terms of verbal speech, written assignments on campus, clothing on campus, and off-campus texting and social media. Okay, and this is going to be a 2 to 3 page paper discussing the students' rights in these 4 areas. Okay, and you're going to specifically mention one law that is related to these following 4 areas: either speech, written, clothing, or texting and social media. And I don't know if you know, but a bill was just passed in California in regards to cell phones. So that's even putting it out there. That's the new bill that we'll be implementing in the future. Okay. And that is your assignment number 4. Questions? Okay. Assignment number 5 is your signature assignment. Just reminding you that the signature assignment is the assignment that must be completed. I always like to, it's the beginning of a new year, but new year, new challenges sometimes, and things happen unexpectedly. So when that signature assignment has to be completed, you can have an A in the course. And if you don't complete that particular assignment, you don't get credit for the course. So it's really important that that signature assignment is completed. It is due week 8, which if you're having a tough, 8 weeks, that's the last week. And there's no room for me to move that around. That is due on Wednesday of the week 8. Okay. And so if something happens to where you're delayed by a day or two, don't worry about that. Just get it in as soon as possible. I do grades on Saturday, and then I have to send them in on Sunday. So there's no room for me if something happened to you tragically or something big happens to you that I can adjust that. So that's really important for you to know. This signature assignment is we're going to review and analyze 3 court cases, okay? And you're going to do a literature review on the topic. This one is really detailed. So you have to select from sources other than your text. So the textbook, if you go back to the court cases, they're all in alphabetical order, and you're not allowed to use those court cases. Okay. So you're going to have to do research on your own and find 3 court cases that surround the theme that we'll be discussing throughout the themes that we'll be discussing throughout, like cyber bullying, duty of care, sexual abuse, child abuse. There's a lot of themes in the book, and they're listed according to the titles of our chapters. Okay. So you'll pick those themes. It doesn't matter if it's the public college, or if it's the kinder, all the way through 12th and college level. You can choose any court case. And then it should involve a school counselor or a school employee. So maybe the counselor wasn't involved, but maybe the principal was, and maybe the counselor was just a part of it initially and then absolved of it. So you can still use that court case. And you're going to specifically follow the key elements, and you're going to make sure that your paper has APA format and citations, the APA style heading. You're going to include an abstract in this particular paper. And then the abstract is always 150 to 250 words, which kind of discusses and summarizes the primary legal and ethical issues and outcomes of your court case studies. And in your paper, you're going to have a purpose, which describes the theme that was selected and why it was selected, the problem and the statement of belief, like what are your personal beliefs with the importance to the problem that you've selected. Then you're going to analyze those 3 court cases. And through that analysis, you're not going to summarize the court cases. I don't want to know a whole summary about what happened in each one of those court cases. You're going to take out the important parts, like why this happened and this didn't happen in this court case, and you're going to put all of that together. So you should break down the reading into smaller parts and examine the structure and the details of the legal and ethical issues behind that court case. Okay. And you should be answering these questions as you're analyzing those 3 court cases. What's the issue at hand? What is the reasoning behind the issue and or claim? Any relevant research or study or past court cases that support or refute the claim for both of the parties? And then what are the strengths and weaknesses of both of the opposing arguments? And you're not going to express your opinion in this analysis section. You're just kind of giving the facts in that analysis section. Then the next section is called the finding section. That's where you're going to tell us the outcome of your 3 court cases, like whether the defendant or the plaintiff won and why. And then you're going to do a reflection, which is reflecting on describing the court cases and the impact of your understanding and practice as a school counselor. And then your conclusion, describing the new learning that has occurred as a result of your analysis, right? And this is going to be 4 to 5 pages long. All right. So this is something that you should start like as soon as we end this session, taking a look at your book, looking at the different themes in the chapters. If you wait to do it week 8, you will not have enough time. It will be difficult for you to do the research and find these 3 court cases and find some 3 that you want to go together to create the theme to create your paper. All right. Any questions or concerns about your 5 assignments? You have 5 assignments that are due. And again, this last one is due that Wednesday of week 8. No questions, no concerns? All right. So for this class, let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Here is our book, and just so you know that you have the legal school counselors, principles and ethics of law, and it's the 5th edition. All right. And I'm going to play a video for you about the changes that has occurred with the 2022 changes of the new law and ethical issues. I'm not going to share the whole thing. Play the whole video, but I'm going to get to the part.
Our webinar today is titled ASCA Ethical Standards. Able to identify a state liaison and Guam as well. And together they were given a section of the ethical standards to review and provide feedback on. And they met in groups that were led by a captain, and a captain was a member of our ethics committee. Between October and January, the states worked on their assigned sections. They met regularly with the other states and with their captain to discuss and process needed changes to our ethical standards. So one thing that's really important, because standards matter, is that all 50 states, this is the first time in ASCA's history that all 50 states contributed to the process of updating our ethical standards to really reflect the voice and the values of our profession. In January, all the recommended changes were sent to the ethics committee and to ASCA staff. I will say that the states weren't confined to just the section that they were assigned. They were able to also comment and provide feedback on other parts of the ethical standards, but to break it down and make it easier, we did have everybody assigned to a section. So the ethics committee began meeting about 2 to 4 times a week for approximately 4 weeks from the time that those suggestions came back until February 10th of 2022. And we met to reduce the redundancy in the suggested changes, to smooth out transitions. We also met with the diversity, equity, and inclusion and position statement committees to get their feedback on changes as well. Both of those committees took a really close look at the changes, and they added some language and some suggestions. And then once all of those changes were put into a readable document, the whole document was sent out for public comment. If I remember right, I think it was in April. And then once the public comment period ended, the committee met again and incorporated public comment. There was some really good feedback that came out of the public comment period, and that was also incorporated into the revised standards. And they were adopted officially on July 1 of 2022.
So any of you that have ever participated in a webinar or a session with Carolyn Stone, you have probably heard these terms. And we want to take a minute to just really remember that although this document is newly updated, we've included a lot of feedback throughout the process. Codes are not exhaustive. If we think about our ethical standards, they're aspirational. It's what we aspire to be and aspire to do, but rooted in the reality of we have some confines and some restrictions in our own buildings. Sometimes we have laws that often or sometimes collide with our ethical standards. And so it's not that these are prescriptive of if this, then this. It's important for us to remember that this is an aspirational set of standards that we follow and that we look to when making some decisions as we work with students and work with stakeholders in our buildings. And the reason why we do update these on a regular basis is because our code needs to be reflective of what's happening in society. And we know that there's a lot of things happening right now. And so it's important for us to make sure that that languaging, that inclusion, and all of those pieces are reflected within our ethical standards for the profession.
So over the course of the
So what I want you to do now is if you can go to ASCA and down, or I think it's in your on Canvas, that the ethical standards, I want you to pull that up so you can follow along within the sections, because they're going to briefly go over what sections changed. And so you can see, you'll have the new parts to it. So you'll be able to see like what was there. They'll talk about what was there before, and you'll have you can follow along as they discuss what happened and what process they went through. Remember, this happened in 2022, right after COVID. So some of those changes came about because of the things that we learned during COVID.
this presentation, we're going to dig into each section that was changed to give you an overview of the specific changes that were made, but just to give you a general overview of the major changes as a whole. Really, there were changes in wording. So words were changed to be more action-oriented. As Dr. Wyckoff mentioned, it's really looking again at the changes in society. So a lot of addition of inclusive language, emphasis on safe school environment, ensuring equity, and you'll see that as we talk about some of the specifics, that's really incorporated more throughout in the new 2022 standards. And then again, incorporating the ASCA National Model language of the 4th edition. So in overall, some standards became bigger and were expanded. Other standards became smaller and were made a little bit more concise. Also, some of the order of the standards were changed just to create a better flow as they really read through. I think that's what the committee and all the states did a really nice job, the representatives, of really looking at everything holistically, looking at wording as well as flow. So really trying to make it the best that it can be at this point. And then in general, 2 standards were eliminated from the previous standards. So the previous 2016 standards had A.2.H, which really dealt with HIV/AIDS and reporting communicable diseases to a third party who might be at risk of contracting a disease. And this was really eliminated because in the midst of COVID, it was confusing and it was really too prescriptive following the COVID-19 pandemic. And also with the recognition that we do have the section related to the duty to warn, which is already covered. So really felt like that specific standard wasn't needed at this point. And again, in the midst of the pandemic, it was really too prescriptive. And then we also, or the committee also eliminated the previous DK standard. And that one really had to do with school counselors who were site supervisors of internship students using evaluation tools when supervising those students and the selection of appropriate evaluation tools. And really that was eliminated because there was a recognition that universities typically provide site supervisors with the evaluation tools that they're required or asked to use. So school counselors aren't typically selecting those evaluation tools on their own. They're given to them by the university they're partnering with. So really recognizing that wasn't needed. So that one was eliminated as well. So those were the two standards that were fully eliminated from the 2016 standards. And then in total, 34 new standards were added, which we'll talk about over the course of this presentation.
So in the preamble and the purpose, which is the very start of our ethical standards, there were changes to the wording and some language updates, and specifically the sentence about school counselors having unique qualifications and skills was moved out of the first paragraph and right to the very top of the second paragraph, just because it flowed a little bit better. But also the wording was changed up a little bit to say that they have the skills to implement a comprehensive school counseling program that addresses pre-K through 12 students' academic, career, and social and emotional development needs. In the preamble and purpose section, there were overall language updates focusing on the importance of a physically and emotionally safe environment that's inclusive, that's healthy, and making sure that school counselors recognize our duty to make sure students are getting equitable access to a school counseling program, and supporting students from all backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds. So those were the main changes in our preamble and purpose section.
So I'm going to give you a general overview of Section A. Section A is quite lengthy, where quite a bit of our ethical standards sit in our, and especially as it relates to confidentiality and some other pieces. So Section A will go on a little bit. So we put an overview here. Again, like Wendy just said, there's a greater emphasis on equity and that creating and sustaining the safe and inclusive environments. So that it's making sure that it talks about our actions and our role in doing that as school counselors. Some pieces about making sure that we are addressing personal biases and receiving training that's relevant to culturally sustaining practices. And that was a lot of feedback that came from our DEI committee as well. We changed language, I think, and Jamie talked about this throughout, from like the intention, but we're increasing that person first language instead of that deficit language. Standards that are mentioned there were specifically addressed from lessons that we all learned as a profession from COVID, and helping us just make sure that our standards are applicable to maybe any other pandemics that we may face in the future. There were two sections that were renamed. So A5 used to be dual relationships section, and now and managing boundaries, and that has a different name now, and we'll go through that in a minute. And then A11 was bullying, harassment, and child abuse all lumped into one section, and we recognize that those things don't fit together, and so those two sections specifically had a major overhaul, which is where some of those 34 new standards really fell in line.
Before they move on, can you all see that? You can see the screen. Okay, so some of the things that you would want, they already moved on. Oopsie. Let me go back just a little bit. I wanted to right here. So dual relationships, managing boundaries, bullying, harassment, child, these are all the themes that I'm referring to that you'll be looking for those court cases, okay? They'll go into more detail about it, but these are the notes that you want to take down. Like, what sounds interesting to you? Which ones do you think that you'll be interested in finding court cases?
Different name now, and we'll go through that in a minute. And then A11 was bullying, harassment, and child abuse all lumped into one section, and we recognize that those things don't fit together. And so those two sections specifically had a major overhaul, which is where some of those 34 new standards really fell in line. So just to start at the top of A, and if you have your standards, the new standards, you can access them on ASCA's website. If you have them to kind of follow along, it may make this seem a little bit less confusing. But so again, some of it is just wording, and some of it is actually new standards that are added. So as you see here, A1B, that we added this piece about fostering and affirming all students and their identity and psychosocial development. So this is not only talking about just gender identity, but just all students fostering their identity and that full psychosocial development. We thought that was incredibly important. A2P was also a brand new standard in advocating for physical and virtual workspaces. Again, this came directly from lessons learned during COVID that are arranged to protect the confidentiality of students' communications and records. We learned that during that time, some of that confidentiality was hard, especially as we're transmitting things via the internet. And so that was a new standard. In A3, which deals with comprehensive school counseling programs, we reordered those standards in that section. So it's not that there's brand new standards there, but it was reordered to help school counselors really understand how to build that comprehensive school counseling program and what our responsibilities are in that realm. And then A4, there are two new standards here. One is addressing personal bias related to students' post-secondary choices and recognizing that, that a four-year college is not the only option for students and likely is not necessarily the best option for all students, and that we need to make sure that we aren't projecting that bias on students as we're helping them with their college and career planning for post-secondary. And then also in the same vein, addressing any inequitable systemic policies and practices related to students' post-secondary choices. So this could be if your school building has academies or things of that nature, and if there are GPAs or certain tracking things that are keeping students either out of or thrusting them one way or the other, really addressing those and how that's part of our role as school counselors is to look at those from a systemic lens and really talk about how those policies are impacting students negatively. More in so A5 is one that used to be called the dual relationships piece, and some great feedback came in regarding this section. And so that section has been renamed Sustaining Healthy Relationships and Managing Boundaries. And I think we had some great conversation as a committee in this section and recognizing that dual relationships happen, and in some places, dual relationships are necessary in order to make connections with families and students. So things like attending graduation parties or attending specific events might be necessary in order to gain trust of some of our families. And the way it was written in our old standards, and again, standards aren't prescriptive, but the way that it was written in our old standards, it almost made it seem like that was a no-no. And so in this section, we added 4 new standards to just help us kind of think through when those dual relationships happen, how to navigate it and make sure that it's a healthy relationship and how we manage those boundaries.
So a quick example of the dual relationships, like she was saying, we would go to a student's soccer game, to build those relationships, especially if they're in foster care or with a guardian, and you're providing that extra support and confidence. But where you're drawing the line is, would you give them your personal or work cell phone number? And it depends. That's going to be a depending question, right? So, if I throw that out there now, would you give them your work cell phone number? Jump in. What do you think? Come on, social workers, help them out.
I mean, okay, so I do now because I have a work cell phone, but I'm in my head, I'm like, do school counselors have a separate cell phone? So that's where my head is at. But as a social worker, yes, I would. Work
Okay,
cell
so
phone, not personal.
we're talking about if you had one. I mean, there would be some schools that could potentially give you one. I don't. My district doesn't. But if that does happen for you, would you give them your work email number?
I would, but there's always been boundaries with it anyways.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it depends on the age group, right? So we're looking at if it's my work number, and then um, I am helping a student on the weekends with college and career or applications, something like that. It seems like we would be having a professional conversation, something similar to meeting them on Google Meets, to go over and discuss certain things, right? So that would be a way to text. They're asking you a question. How do I fill out this application? I'm on this website. What do I need? So I think it does depend on the age, right? If the student is in need of support and they're younger, you probably don't want them having that, because if they start calling it and using it or misusing it, or putting you in a situation where they're calling you and informing you of being in danger, and you are unable to assist because you really need them to call 911. So that isn't something that we would want to, promote for the younger students, right? So I think we have to think about, who can use it appropriately and whatnot. And then we have to look at all the different types of children that we come in contact with. Abused children, sexually abused, trafficked, all of this stuff. And they come with a lot of heavy stuff. And so they can easily misinterpret a relationship, correct? Based on their past. And it's not because you did something wrong. It's probably just about how they see things, right? And they don't have healthy boundaries. So we have to be cautious of that, even when we're looking at age, right? And we'll talk about age later.
So that section is pretty extensively reworked. In group work, we added 3 new standards there. We want to talk about culturally sustaining group counseling services. So that was consistent language throughout the document, the idea of culturally sustaining. Also, equitable access to participation and removing obstacles to participation in groups. And so we're making sure all students have access and not just some students. And then topic selection. And we had quite an extensive conversation around this one as well. And just realizing that there are topics that are probably not best suited for groups in schools, topics that could stir up a lot of emotion, that would be hard for a student to pack back together and head back to the classroom, but also a place where we as school counselors might not have the expertise and might be kind of out of our scope. And so that piece was added. And then in A8, student.
So groups have become extremely important at all levels with MTSS, and a lot of the districts. I mean, some districts have had MTSS for years, but I know my district is relatively new, building their whole MTSS process, right? And many other districts in Southern California are in that same place. So with the groups, I mean, many times school counselors never had enough time to create these small groups, these small individual groups. And in high school, what we would do is see a student individually, right? We would just go and call them in and work on academics, and that's it. But what they're saying now is that we really do need to do more group work and make sure it's equitable and that we're doing it for all students. And how are we doing it? How are we choosing those students to determine how to place them in a group? Any thoughts about that? Do you have any idea how we would put students in groups?
Wouldn't it be all based on their needs and group them by either academics if they're going to you for academics or they're going to you for a specific reason? I know with our elementary groups, we use Panorama. So we'll go off of that. So when they have the same need or they're going for the same reasoning, then we'll group them together.
Excellent. So yeah, we would do a needs assessment as school counselors. We're going to have to collect a lot of data these days. So I've been around. They've thrown data at us and then they pull it back. They throw it at you and then they pull it back. But now it's really important. So they're equipping us all, just like with us with a teacher. If a math teacher needs to do a group and they need to do a medium, high, and low, or a language arts teacher, it doesn't matter, right? And they need to do a medium, high, and low. They are consistently looking at data through their weekly assessments and then their monthly assessments, their unit assessments, and then their standardized tests that they give. We're doing the same thing. We're literally doing out SEL screeners and different things to address the social emotional needs, the needs assessment, or if you see that students you can put something out to the teachers to see, what have they heard? What are some of the needs of the students, either grief-wise, separation, all the different categories. And then you could do some type of individual counseling with them to see which ones would fit in a group neatly together. Because we all can have grief issues, but it's not the same. We all can have SEL, but it's not the same. So we need to figure out who goes together and how and what were the tools that we use to determine that.
Peer support programs. There were 3 new standards added there. And again, the bulk of that was around equitable access, representation, making sure that if we have peer support programs, that those that are part of those peer support programs are representative of our whole student population, that it's not just a certain group of students that get to be part of those programs. And making sure that if we have those programs, that we're sharing the goal of those programs with our stakeholders, whether it's parents, community members, principals, teachers.
Haley, did you want to speak at all to A5J about the conflict of interest?
Sorry, I kind of skipped over that one. In that section, we just talked about as school counselors, we know that we have some power and we have some privilege when we're working with families because we're seen as, I don't want to say authority figures, but we are seen as important. And so just being aware of self-promotion, whether it is if you have private practice in the community or whether you have some sort of side connections, side businesses, that you would want to make sure that there isn't some sort of conflict of interest when you're engaging in those healthy relationships with families.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So A9 is one that comes up a lot in our frequently asked questions in talking about and thinking about when we work with students who may be thinking of suicide and how to approach that. So it's a really important new language that was incorporated into A9B specifically. And Unfortunately, there are some districts that require their counselors to use a specific risk assessment tool. The previous standard kind of spoke a little bit to the selection of a tool. We want to get away from that. We focus more on how it is almost impossible to accurately quantify a level of suicide risk. And this is really important, and a lot of research bears this out. So we want to move away from telling people that their child is low, medium, or high risk. So in this standard, it was reworded and emphasized that the importance of recognizing that challenge in quantifying risk. And then if you are required to use some type of risk assessment, to understand that it is only an information gathering tool. It is only one piece of information in a process. And when we are reporting the results of that assessment to parents and guardians, that we never negate risk of the student's potential harm to themselves. And we always are going to report that risk to parents. So students may minimize risk to avoid scrutiny, and it's our imperative to let parents know that we've done an assessment, that there is some risk. It's to underscore the need for parents to act. It's not to report a judgment of risk level. So important new language in A9B.
All right, so this is a huge theme, serious and foreseeable harm to self and others. Okay, so this is one of the themes that are in the book. So this is another one that you would take a look at. And this is when you're talking about, there's two sides to it. We work with the foreseeable harm to self, okay? Usually deans and principals, and we are on the team for threat assessments, which is harm to others. Okay, so with the threat assessment, you're in California, you are required as a school district to have a policy and procedure on suicide prevention, suicide policy prevention. Okay, so with that, you must follow to the letter of the law, whatever your district's policy is. Okay, and every year we review that policy as mental health representatives, and then it goes to the lawyer. So we make any type of changes within my district as a unit. So we've grown. We started with only school counselors, and now we have grown. We have social workers, we have MFTs, and we have BCBAs. So all those people take a look at the policy and the procedure. Now, our behaviors are in a different section. They work on the threat assessment. We are in just the social workers and the school psychologists and the school counselors are in charge of the suicide. So it's really just the school counselors and the schools social workers that are primary. Okay, and so it says that you have to be seen by one of those two. Okay, so if only one is available, then the other one can be present. Then you can pick someone else. Maybe you need an MFT, maybe somebody else is more available, but that's the way we wrote our policy, that it needs to be a counselor first. Our school psychologists are in line. They're close to us, but they're the ones that are most difficult to find. So, and that was because we didn't have full-time psychologists at every site. So that was difficult for us. But like they said, our district did choose a tool. And you have to have that tool so that you know where you're going with that risk assessment, right? And so our job is then to contact the parent, which is always the end result, no matter what happens, low, medium, or high. We don't even use that conversation or have that conversation with the parents. We only have the conversation amongst ourselves, and then we report out to the parent. and provide the parent with the proper resources. Now, at no time do we just call. Like, I never just call and say this happened. I don't care how low it is. Okay. I always ask them to come in. And if they say they can't come right now, I wait for them. That's just the bottom line. And then once they come in, I share with them the information that I received, whether it was via written, verbally, and I go over that information with them. And then I let them know, if they need any support, we're here for that. And then we move forward from there. So that's just one of our policy and procedures. So ours, foreseeable harm to others, we can see that like if we're in a counseling and we're dealing with somebody who has anger management and we know that they are having difficulty maybe getting along with some of the students there, threatening to cause harm to some of the students there. So where we are at fault is if we don't report that, right? Because in a counseling session, our counseling sessions are confidential, but when are they not confidential? 3 reasons. You should always have this memorized.
I think it's when you're gonna hurt yourself, hurt others, and I can't remember.
Someone's hurting you. There you go. So write it down. Hurting yourself, hurting someone else, or someone's hurting you. Those are the 3 things that you must go over no matter when you take a student in at all times. This is confidential unless these 3 things occur. Or one of these 3 things occur. And if that happens, you just tell them immediately that I have to get you the support and the help that you need, and I can no longer keep this. And that's what this foreseeable harm is about, right? So this foreseeable harm is if someone reports to you and I want to kill this person, I'm so angry at this person, this is I want to cause harm to them, that is when you will, get the threat assessment team together. And that should be, you should know who that is on your thing. Now, you as the mental health provider should be on the threat assessment team. But that's the part where you start to look at, okay, well, this is where their mental health is, because oftentimes what happens next when you tell them that you're gonna you have to report this. The principal needs to know. That's usually the first contact person for when someone's causing harm to someone, wants to cause harm to someone else. What's the next thing that they'll say, potentially? You're ruining my life. I want to cause harm to now me, right? So this is where we have to kind of make sure that we're still on that team, because now you want to cause harm to yourself. I have to do my risk assessment, but then I also need to make sure that you don't have access to cause harm to someone else. Okay? Questions, concerns? All right.
So in another addition, kind of continuing with A9, a new standard that was added is the importance of providing culturally responsive mental health resources to parents or guardians throughout the process. As Dr. Rock was just talking about, that's an important step in providing student support and making sure that it's not just resources, but that they're culturally responsive, and that school counselors are really intentional about the resources that they're providing. So moving on to section A10, section A10 was renamed to marginalized populations, which was previously titled underserved and at-risk populations. So really recognizing that marginalized populations would be a more appropriate term to encompass the information in that section. 2 new standards were added, standard G and standard H. So G really talks about advocating for access and inclusion and opportunities for all students, such as AP classes, gifted, honors, dual enrollment classes. So really making sure that we're advocating for access for students individually. And then H really, again, talks at that systemic level of systemic change and looking at actively advocating for changes at the systemic larger level that is needed to ensure ensure equitable participation for all students across courses and programs and things like that. So really looking at both levels that we're advocating for students, but we're also advocating for systemic change at that as well. And then
Marginalized
Section
populations and
A11,
historically
as mentioned
underserved,
earlier, this was
same
pretty
thing. New
significantly
wording.
readjusted. There was a lot of standards that were added, and it was a new section title. So as mentioned before, the child abuse section was separated out of this section because really we realized that it didn't fit very well. They really didn't go as well together. So that was separated into its own section. And then this section was retitled Bullying, Harassment, Discrimination, Bias, and Hate Incidents. Again, I think this section really showcases the responsiveness to societal changes that were happening, really trying to encompass equity, inclusion, and promoting safety for all students and belonging. So in all those changes and those additional standards that were added, one of them, the first one really talks about recognizing that bullying, harassment, discrimination, bias, hate incidents really can be rooted in race, gender, sexual orientation, students' intersectional identities, and recognizing that that is an important component of where some of those can come from. And then again, advocating at the systemic level of policies. So really ensuring that policies are created for all students to ensure that the school is a place of safety, belonging, and justice. Again, you hear that language throughout, justice and belonging. And then also recognizing another standard, and I think it's C, talks about, or it might be E, one of the additional ones that were added in, I think it might be E, but talks about recognizing that bias incidents don't just affect the student, and it's not just potentially traumatizing for the students involved, but that it really affects the school climate and culture as a whole. So it's important for school counselors to engage in active practices that support a positive school climate, that supports a sense of belonging. Again, looking at that systemic level, that's really an ethical responsibility of school counselors to support that at the large level in the school climate to ensure that's a place of safety. And then the last two additional standards that were added to this section really relate to prevention and response. So talking about prevention and response to bullying and harassment, discrimination incidents, and looking at collaborating with administrators, providing support, healing, recovery for students who are engaged in these incidents, and then just, again, actively responding, that response, that action is really important for school counselors to engage when those incidences occur. And then, as I mentioned, the child abuse section is now its own section in A12. So not too much was changed in that section in terms of the content, but just some of the wording was changed. Really, it was rearranged a little bit. Wording was changes. One of the standards was separated out to be more concise and specific and easy to read, but it really covers many of the same topics that were in the 2016 standards. And then A15 is where
Okay, a little bit about the child abuse, because that's another thing that is discussed in our chapters. But the child abuse, just remembering that the new rules and that each employee is trained, because we're all mandated reporters. And a lot of times you'll find administrators who, and we have a lot of new administrators coming in that don't have as much experience, but they're accustomed to the mental health people being responsible for the child abuse. So you'll often say, oh, this kid has something to tell you, or this happened. But if they've already told another employee who's a mandated reporter, that doesn't absolve them because they could tell you a totally different story in that section. And you may choose not to report, but the other person may have wanted to report. So this is why we don't have that. We're going to pass the buck. Okay. We're going to tell it to this person, tell it to this person. Now, if someone calls you in, which happens to me all the time, they'll call me in, they'll say, Miss Bubba, we need you. And then they'll bring me in, and then I'll have the student retell the story. And well, tell me what you said to her, whoever her is. If it's the health clerk, if it's the yard supervisor, if it's this, what happened? How'd you fall? Because mine are babies. I'm at the elementary level. So, a lot of times the children connect with one specific employee, right? So with that employee, that's why they're telling the story. Look what happened. Mommy got so angry. And so then when they get to you, the story kind of shrinks a little. So you really want to hear the whole story. So a lot of times I ask them, just stay with me ask them the questions again so that I can be the person. And then I'll just let the person know if it's our classified employee, like a yard supervisor or something. I'll say, I'll take it from here, even though they are responsible for filing it. But I'll just let them know that because they have to be outside and it's just easier if I do it from that point forward.
Where technical and digital citizenship comes into play. I think, again, some lessons learned from a lot of school counselors who engaged in virtual school counseling during the COVID pandemic, and a lot of things that came up from frequently asked questions and what that looked like is you can see kind of interwoven in this section as well. So 3 new standards were added to this section, and they really talked about challenges with confidentiality when using email. So really recognizing those challenges that are inherent in using email, that we can't guarantee confidentiality, and working to establish boundaries for responding to emails. So ensuring that students don't think we are available 24/7 if they have crisis situations, that they're not emailing their counselor at 1 a.m, assuming that they're going to get a response. So really making sure those boundaries are set into place. Another edition really talked about advocating for virtual learning tools that include safeguards to protect student information. So again, kind of going back to that confidentiality in technology, making sure that students' information is protected in the tools that we're using. And then the third one really talks about advocating against alert tools requiring constant monitoring by school personnel. So we're seeing a lot of rise of software that, for example, sends automatic alerts to school personnel, maybe when students are on a computer or if certain search terms are used in a computer, and it automatically sends alerts to school personnel such as school counselors, and really recognizing that those tools are not aligned with the nature and function of school counseling. Again, if they're sent to a school counselor at a certain time of day, or if they're not available, it just doesn't align well. So really advocating against the use of those software systems, those tools, which doesn't align well with our role. And then in AC.
So what'll happen with those tools? They're in my district. They've moved them to, and they're monitored by the principal. So the principal is the one that receives all of those alerts and then farms them out accordingly, according to where they need to go. So if a student is threatening to cause harm to him or herself, then obviously it gets forwarded to me, and then I have to investigate from there. So and I have to look at and the way the tool that we use is Blocksy, so it can kind of see, it kind of takes you all the way through the process, like what they were looking at before, so you can really see everything when you get the alert. And when you get that alert, you're able to see, okay, they were Googling a song, or they were going. So sometimes that it doesn't require the investigation process, but these are the things that when they talk about, yeah, we can't monitor it 24/7. We're not responsible for it because obviously we have the students can't have a computer at home and at school. And so when they're at home, they're doing their homework on that computer and they're under the care of their parents. So we are not responsible for getting that Blocksy alert and then calling home and saying, what are they looking at? What's going on? But the principal may do that. The principal may call from their home and say, okay, depending on how detailed the alert is and what's going on, to make sure that the family's okay. Do they need resources? Is something going on? And then they'll kind of loop us in later on. But ultimately, they're responsible. So that is why they're following up more so than we are, right? And our ASCA standards support that we don't need to be on call 24/7.
16, looking at virtual distance school counseling, there was one new standard that was added that really looked at the challenges of assisting students considering suicide when you're engaging in virtual school counseling. I think this came up a lot. There's a lot of questions that came up about this during the pandemic when a lot of school counselors were engaged in virtual school counseling of how do we handle these situations when students do express suicidal ideations. And so this really adds some information on that, of recognizing the challenges of what that can be when you're working with a student virtually, thinking about identifying their physical location, keeping them on the call, locating their parents, getting help to their location. So that's what that standard is really talking about, is addressing suicidal or students at risk of suicide virtually.
So whereas Section A is all about the school counselor's responsibility to their students, and that is our primary client, is our students. Section B talks about the school counselor's responsibilities to parents and guardians, to the school, and to themselves. And so B1 talks about responsibilities to parents and guardians. There are 2 new standards that were added to this section. Overall, the language was updated to be more inclusive and culturally responsive. We do recognize that parents and guardians are the guiding voice in their children's lives, and it is imperative that we partner with parents and guardians for the benefit of their students. So one of the new standards is B1E, which talks about any time that a school counselor gives a survey, a universal screener, a needs assessment, the importance of not only following their school district policy and local, state, and federal law in administering those policies, but making sure to adhere to the Protection of People Rights Amendment when using these screeners, and informing parents or guardians prior to their use in accordance with the law. That's really important. Also, standard B1F talks about the importance of engaging our parents in our school counseling program, providing meaningful conversations, allowing them to contribute to our school counseling programs, and the importance of having diverse sample of parents and guardians that provide that voice. Section B2 is
the most important part of that section was just our responsibility to our parents, because they are still, whether we're talking K all the way to 12th grade, they're still in charge of their children, because their children are not over the age of 18 until maybe somewhere in senior year at times. And so all the way up to that point, what is our responsibility to the parents, and letting them know what's going on with their child or with the student in the school setting. And then responsibilities to our school, like, making sure that people understand our roles. And that's one of your assignments for the week, is you'll see the school counselor's role, making sure that your principal and everyone there knows what you do and how you do it. And then your responsibilities to yourself, making sure that you do self-care and you take care of yourself as a school counselor, because our ratios are still relatively high, even though we're dropping in enrollment. But we know as we drop in enrollment, they also drop the number of counselors that we have on site as well. So it seems like the ratios continue to be. And just think about it. Anytime, it would be ideal to be 250, which is what the ASCA is saying is the best ratio for a school counselor. But like myself, I'm the only school counselor, and there's 580 students, and it will never be, smaller than that. So we've gone as high as 630, 640. But in the drop in our enrollment, we're down to like about 580, 575. That's our lowest amount. Okay. All right. I had a whole chapters 1 and 2, I was going to go over that, which talks about the introduction to the school counseling and professionalism. What I'll do is I'll just do a video highlighting the key points of that, and I'll share that with you through the announcements, and you can take a look at it. It'll help you to just kind of understand what's going on, and I'll highlight some important parts of the um, the 2 chapters. The last thing that I wanted to share with you was just how I went about finding stop sharing for a second. Hold on. All right. So when I was looking for let me just move this over really fast. All right. So when I was trying to, I wanted to show you an example of how to begin your search for your court cases. So I looked up, court cases involving school counselors in the past 20 years, 25 years on child abuse. And then AI created a couple of cases and what I did was then take a couple of the cases and looked in our book and made sure that those cases weren't in our book. And then I take a look at those, and I said last 25 years because that will take us back to 2000, which isn't too long ago. And then I came up with, I think I ended up doing, my first search was on sexuality. So when I did the sexuality, then I was able to find the court cases, and then this is Ward versus Polite, and that is one of the court cases that is not found in our book. So this was on LGBTQ. AI was one of those sexual gender identity ones. And then they listed about 3 others, and I took a look at those 3 to see if they were also listed in the book, which they weren't. And then I went to Just Law, which is right here. And that is when I did a search here to find that specific case that I was looking for. And that was how I was able to get this document. And now I have the whole court case for my first, and my theme would be LGBTQ AI plus students. All right. Any questions or concerns about that? So you're looking for your themes and what you're interested in, and then you'll get some court cases, and you want to make sure that the court cases, and remember the names, you want to read the court cases, make sure that that's the one that you're looking for. And then when you go to Just Law, you're trying to get that document, the whole court case with the outcomes at the bottom. And then that's your research. So that document that I was showing with you was 22 pages. So you can understand why I'm asking you to begin looking for these 3 cases, because you've got to read all of the court case, what happened, the laws that were used, did they win, did they not win, and so on and so forth. All right. So start thinking about, take a look at the book. You remember that your first discussion board is due today. I'll be going in there and responding to that. And then you have 2 responses that are due by Sunday evening. Okay. So your first discussion board is due tonight by 11:59 p.m. And then you will take a look at some of the themes that we talked about from the ASCA webinar that we just reviewed, and I highlighted some of them, and you can take a look at them through the chapters in the textbook. and then you can start Googling and trying to find. If you find one court case this evening, you're on the right track. So if you can find two, you're halfway there. And then all you have to do is download them, have them, put them over to the side, and then you'll know that you're ready for your last assignment, and you won't be looking for things, but you'll just be highlighting and analyzing that. Okay. So then when you're doing your literature review, you would do your literature, and your literature review, you would just read a couple of things on child abuse, the history of child abuse, and what do other people say about it? The history of the LGBTQ AI plus community. What does everybody say about it? And remember, when you're doing that literature review, which is a section in that paper, you're just kind of doing it in a paragraph or so. So normally when you do a literature review, you take about 3 or 4 sources. You're only going to take like 1 or 2 and just kind of say, what does everybody say about that subject? Okay. Questions, concerns? All right. This will conclude our session for this evening. I will see you week 3 for our next live session. And remembering that week 5 is when you're doing your presentations. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night.